Forum, The Impaired Professional, What Are the Signs? From the studio in the College of Education and Health Professions at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, this is the Education Forum with your host, Dr. Jeff Conklin. Welcome to the Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. Recently, there was a shooting incident at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where Dr. Amy Bishop, a neurobiologist, is alleged to have shot and killed several faculty members due to her being denied tenure. That will be the subject of today's Education Forum. But first, let me introduce my panel. To the right of me, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Baltimore. Dr. Baltimore is a professor of counseling at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's great to be here on this program. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, thank you. And beside him, my co-host, Dr. Greg Blaylock. Greg is an assistant professor of special education at Columbus State University. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Lately, there have been several incidents of violence in not only universities, but in workplaces around the country. Today, we're going to focus on professionals that are impaired, and are we missing the signs, and what are the signs? So I'd like to begin by turning it over to you, Dr. Baltimore.
Well, this has been a real tragedy, but it's brought a certain amount of awareness to a lot of us, especially those in academia, but those of us in mental health as well. And the question really is, I mean, here's a very intelligent woman who had a strong academic background and published and was up for tenure, which, by the way, is can sometimes be a career-ending decision.
Absolutely.
But so a lot of importance to that kind of decision. But very intelligent, but yet there was something very wrong at the same time. So the question of whether or not intelligence really equates to good mental health is on the table, and just what can we look for in the folks in academia. And if you have a high IQ and if you've accomplished a lot intellectually and in the academic realm, does that really indicate that you have good mental health? And I think that question's out, and I'd love for us to talk a little bit more about that.
Great. When you say that, I think we really need a definition of mental health.
Well, there's a lot of definitions out there to a certain extent, but it does require a certain amount of intelligence to interact with your world. But I think there's a certain maturity level that comes with it, and life learning process as we learn from children up to adolescence to really regulate our interactions with those in the world around us, and how do we really receive and give and take in terms of how we manage our lives, and manage. Also, I think mental health is also this notion of the ability to regulate your emotions. And when stress comes in your life, and after enough learning in our life lessons, there should be enough of an indication there that we can manage stress at some level that doesn't push us to the brink of, say, mental illness, or one of the diagnoses from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our categorization of mental illness that we've used in this country. And so this idea of well-being, the idea of managing our affairs day to day, having a happy life, having some contentment in our lives, and also the ability to deal with stress and bounce back from stress. Because that, we all go through stress in our lives, and we're always confronted with some level of stress. I mean, just look at our environment these days. So it's really the ability to bounce back from adversity and to make the best of it, and to kind of keep going in life and still maintain good relationships with the people, close relationships, but also extended relationships, and keep a certain self-confidence and ability to care for yourself, and having a positive attitude, and also finding pleasure in activities in both our work and our play and connecting with others. And so those are the kind of indicators, I think, that really set us up to recognize that we're okay, that we have a certain mental health about us and be able to carry on our affairs.
Well, and you mentioned something earlier. You talked about the stress involved with the tenure process.
Yes.
Having been through that, I mean, we could talk about that personally, but
right.
I find it hard to imagine what it would be like if you are turned down for tenure. Isn't that a rejection of you as a person?
Well, it certainly can be taken that way, although, and the way I understand this, and it works this way in most colleges and universities, your portfolio, the evaluation of your portfolio that includes your work, your publications, your teaching, your work in the community, and a lot of other aspects of your work at a university is put into a portfolio so that you can be reviewed. It can be reviewed by your peers, as well as the university administration, and then a decision is made at the lowest level, which is with your peers, and then your department, moving up to the college and university level, and it goes through a number of these levels, so that, and by the way, as a person moves through this, they also get a lot of support and encouragement from people who have been tenured, and they get advisement from others in doing this process. But ultimately, a committee is going to look at that, hopefully in an objective way, and see if there's a goodness of fit, if you will, this ability that you're going to continue to work here. We want you as a larger group, a university group, to work with us. You have potential, you are making a contribution, and so that's when the decision is made. But you're absolutely right, there's a great deal of stress that comes up with that particular at that particular time in a career, and if you are notified that you're not tenured, you lose your job. You will have to leave the university and look for employment elsewhere, and that's going to cause a lot of difficulty for people.
And isn't your career really over at that point?
Well, certainly with that institution, that career is over. That doesn't mean it's totally over. But
if you're at an institution for 7 years, and most of us know that's when people go up for tenure, and if they don't get it and they're cut loose, those are kind of some signs other employers, other universities may pick up on.
Well, this interesting thing about that is that just as we are gathering information to put in a portfolio to demonstrate our worthiness to the university, we're also gathering information about how well we fit into the university and with our peers. And so there's some self-reflection and self-awareness that I think needs to be a part of this. And let's say I'm not getting along well with my peers, and then I'm expecting tenure. Wait a minute, something's out of line here, or maybe I should begin to consult with others and talk with them and kind of come up with some ideas about, well, how best can I fit in? Maybe I need to change some of my behaviors. Maybe I need to do some things that are missing, and become more self-aware and really, in a sense, manage myself so that I am more likely to get tenure. So it's not just, okay, these guys are going to make decisions about me, but what am I going to do in preparing myself in the way I work in a university setting to guarantee, or to not necessarily guarantee, but to advance the notion that I will get tenure.
Well, you mentioned something there about awareness, and I think that might be an issue here, because we're talking about self-awareness, and shouldn't most people know if they're not going to be granted tenure? Shouldn't you know that in advance? It shouldn't be a big surprise. You should have some sort of relationship there with it.
Well, that's a point of contention, I think, and a number of people may have argued about that notion that you're really in the dark about this decision being made, and then you're handed a letter, or you have to wait, and you get this decision, and you really don't. Unless you've done a lot of research, there are some places that you don't know anything about it. All of this is sort of in the dark to the candidate.
Okay.
Well, absolutely. I think, and the reality of it is, at many institutions, you may feel like you're on the way to being granted tenure, right? Even up to the point of the review process, the final review process, and it is completely possible, and it happens, where people from their department on up through their college might be recommended for tenure, but for whatever reason, tenure not granted to them. And
Okay.
as you said,
Okay.
that's can be quite a surprise. And
Sure.
it's
Yeah,
really
and-
Well,
and it's
I guess
unfair, sure.
where I wanted to go with that was more of the awareness thing, because I really want to go back to the mental health issue here. The tenure process is great, and I'm sure that's another show we could do. But I think we really ought to talk about if someone doesn't have that self-awareness, someone really doesn't know how others perceive them, isn't that a sign that there may be some mental health issues?
Well, I would agree with that. I think there is a certain amount of self-awareness and then the self-management of that, but of our own emotions, our ability to, as we talked about a moment ago, to regulate the stress, to bounce back from a stressful situation. But before you can do those things, you have to recognize it at some level. The notion that, wait a minute, something's wrong here. If I don't have any of those cues, any of that information, and I'm marching along thinking everybody loves me, it's going to be great and wonderful, and when they don't, it's not going to go well, you certainly have to. You put in this category of good mental health that its ability to and John Gottman wrote about this some years ago in some of his work with couples and communication, and he said something about the intent of a message is not the same as an impact of the message. And so the difference in communication. So if I'm in my view of how things are going, I don't take into account the information from others, and there's certainly going to be signs out there.
Well,
and if people can be honest about that and give me some feedback about that, then maybe I can know that, well, things are not looking well, and I can attend to that. But if I'm unaware, and if maybe I'm obsessive compulsive, maybe I'm very so focused on the intellectual side and not necessarily on the social personality and interactional side of life, then I'm going to miss those cues, and I'm going to set myself up for some real surprise stress and outcomes that I wasn't really aware of.
Well, don't we know colleagues in our institution that appear not to have a lot of self-awareness, that appear to be maybe an outlier, and they're so caught up in their work, they're so eccentric,
right.
and that's almost like one of the traits that we expect in college professors, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a difference, too, between people that perhaps don't perceive or don't know how people perceive them from the outside and those that simply don't care. Mm-hmm. And we certainly have colleagues, and I don't think that's necessarily a harmful trait to have. A lot of people in history that have moved history along have been people that didn't care how others perceived them.
Sure.
And so in terms of warning signs for mental illness, of course, the so what of this all is, what are the warning signs that we could pick up on? I sort of wonder if it's even possible to look at somebody and go, that person doesn't understand how the rest of the world perceives him or her.
It's funny you should say that, because today we talk about all those people that have Asperger's syndrome. And that would be one of those characteristics. And I think a couple of weeks ago on the show we talked about how Asperger's syndrome is on the rise and how people that used to be considered eccentric now have Asperger's syndrome. And that's kind of the characteristics you were describing. But what I'm wondering is, when we talk about some of these signs, should people be picking up on them? Do people have that much awareness? I mean, can we expect that?
I'm going to say that good mental health, that's a part of good mental health, the ability to be really self-aware and to manage feedback and really kind of question your own behavior and question yourself, am I doing the right thing? Greg was just talking about those people who've changed history, and if you go too far on that spectrum, you move into what mental health professionals call narcissism. This idea that I have the right idea, or maybe there's some other personality disorders out there that says that put people in the categories, and the symptoms really involve sort of self-absorption. I'm right, and then everybody else is wrong. And when you move down that spectrum, you're gonna have some serious problems because most of these type jobs, or even just any job you can name, and just maybe life experience points to the idea of getting along with others and managing relationships. So if I'm so self-absorbed, everybody else is less than what I think of myself, that's going to put us in a mental illness category here, and you're going to find that some things are going to begin to occur, and maybe people react out of when they're surprised by those others' actions, and then therefore you're going to have some problems. I mean, you're going to have these tragic events that we hear about sometimes.
Well, you talk about that. It's kind of a funny business we're in, though. There's a lot of isolation. I mean, people really, you don't follow your colleagues around. You could basically work here and no one would know you were here. You'd go in, you'd teach your classes, you'd do your office hours. So, I mean, whose job is it to monitor folks? I mean,
well, you're absolutely right about this notion, and that's just not within academia. That's certainly in community mental health centers and agencies and hospitals and other clinics. And organizations where you can be isolated from other individuals. We see all kinds of problems with that, and want to encourage people to consult with other professionals, build a team, work together with other people, certainly in mental health, because when you're isolated like that, you have no feedback. There's no helpful information and critical feedback that helps you then change or even contemplate a different mode of operation or different behavior or different thought set. So we can do that, and I'm concerned about the people who work in any of these organizations who isolate themselves and not. And they may do well. They may be intellectually capable. And like you said, we all know those types in our work where they're very focused, their doors are closed, they're typing research projects and articles and manuscripts, but they're not very good at social interaction. So, that conclusion leads me to think that a part of good mental health is having good social interaction with people and be able to build relationships. And that piece, I think, is a critical piece of what we're talking about.
Well, but you say that, it seems to me that in our field as well as other fields, we're really pushing people to be able to work independently, teaching classes online. You could be in the Bahamas and teaching courses here in Georgia. You could be a computer programmer anywhere in the world. We're talking people doing more home offices. So at a time when people are claiming they're more connected, it seems to me they're really more isolated, so we don't have those checks.
Well, and that's in fact with my students, one of the issues that we talk about around collaboration, an important piece of teaching, is that idea of, in today's day and age, do we really know how to collaborate any better than we did 30 years ago, before we had so-called collaboration tools at our disposal through technology? And it's an excellent debate within the classroom to have. And what it brings up for me, and what this conversation makes me consider, is, I wonder if part of mental health, part of a concern for mental health, then might give rise to the professional ideal of creating organizations of work that are highly collaborative.
Okay.
Getting back to who's responsible, who's there to pick up on warning signs. Well, to pick up on a warning sign, we need to perhaps have a work environment where we're able to collaborate on various levels, so that person that's closed off from others at least has opportunities to collaborate.
Well, there's certainly some arguments on both sides of this about whether technology has helped us isolate ourselves as individuals away from the group, versus the idea that technology is a platform that allows us to collaborate more. And so I think the jury's out on that, actually, at this point, Jeff. I don't know, but the notion that these things can be used in both ways to bring us together around a project and so forth. I've had a class of students when we first did a chat room, and there was a certain student that I noticed who was very quiet in the classroom, but when we got in the chat room in technology, and they came from their home and so forth, they were the first person to speak up. And so the technology for that person was really allowed him to engage in the group process. So there are examples like that where technology really brings us together, and of course you're absolutely right. It also isolates us when we're sitting at the computer screen, and I'm certainly concerned about online education and some of those factors. We talked about that on other shows, but the notion that part of education is learning from each other. Certainly group psychotherapy and all the other mental health issues or concerns see that as a very healthy way to learn from others in a group setting.
But, you know, even when you talk about the chat room, people don't necessarily have to be themselves. You know, I could be that 14-year-old girl, you know.
That's
in the
it.
chat room.
Well,
and I look nice that way, too.
Well, that's it. But, you know, part of this is that, you know, there's a mechanism that allows a person to really get information about themselves from other people. That information can be valuable. That we talked about earlier, this notion of self-awareness and then self-regulation, self-management of things that keep us healthy, as opposed to isolating ourselves and being something different than that. And, you know, so I think there's this notion in mental health, we use it all the time, called authenticity.
Okay.
This notion to being an authentic person, who you are, that what's on the inside matches what you see on the outside. And so that portion of mental health, this authenticity notion, and also I guess I would also say congruence, the notion that what I say is what I mean, what I'm feeling and what I'm doing all kind of line up, and that may be an indicator of mental health as well.
Certainly. I think this is a good place to take a break. We'll be right back after these few commercials. You're watching the Education Forum.
You're watching live streaming from the College of Education and Health Professions.
COEHP TV brings you programming from the faculty, students, and staff in the College of Education and Health Professions. Learn more about our programs, admissions, initiatives, and other informative events by tuning to our webcast presented live from the studio located in Jordan Hall. Stay tuned for live classroom streaming coming soon on COEHP TV.
We're back on the Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. Today we're having a discussion about the impaired professional and what are the signs. And this brings me to another question for our guest, Dr. Michael Baltimore. And the question I have is, am I my brother's keeper? Should I be responsible for those I work with? Should I be out there keeping tabs on their mental health?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that I would start to answer that question by saying that we live in a social context. You are not isolated as an individual, an island unto yourself. You're actually in connection, and some people actually believe, and some of the theorists that have written about this notion have said that we can define ourselves by how others define us. And so we learn about ourselves as others give us back information, and we learn to adjust, and that's a way that we become aware more of ourselves and define ourselves in that way. So are we our brother's keepers? Wow, what a question. I think we do have some responsibilities here. There's certainly some evidence out there to say that you can't walk away from a crime happening when a person is being hurt. There's laws there to say that you must do something for a person in those kind of situations. But is it just the right thing to do? And what is the right thing to do? And how far can we go? And we can talk more about that.
Well, and another question comes up. I'm going to throw something out here. Greg and I are friends. Greg and I have been hanging out together, and he knows me pretty well. Okay, Greg, all of a sudden I'm bringing a gun to work. I'm kicking my handgun with me. Are there any signs there? Is there anything? Would you get involved? Would you care? Or would you say, that's Jeff, he's nuts?
Greg, I'm glad he asked you that question. Go ahead.
That's a great question. And so much of it has to do with the context, of course. There are people that will bring handguns to work. I'm sure there are professors that bring handguns to work. Certainly isn't within my value system, but then again, my value system when it comes to firearms is very different from a lot of people's, I'm sure. So I think we have to look at the context and look at you, Jeff, and I know you well enough to know that that's a qualitatively different behavior for you.
Okay.
And so for me to see you start carrying a handgun to work would grab my attention, make me notice, and perhaps sit down with you and say, "Hey, Jeff, I noticed you're packing some heat there. You've got something there in your briefcase. You've got something sitting there on your desk. What's the purpose of that?"
Would you really do that, though?
Absolutely.
Would you really say,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because based on our relationship, on our friendship, we ask each other things outside the work context all the time.
We sure do.
And so that it seems to me something as qualitatively different as that, especially something as inflammatory as bringing a handgun to work, would be hard not to ask about it. That would be the white elephant in the room, so to speak, if you didn't ask about it.
Mike, would that be an indicator of an issue? Would that be a problem?
Well, I like what Greg has said about that, and I'm glad he's going to take the initiative to talk with you about that when he notices that, qualitative, I won't say quantitative, change in you, that he talked to you about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that you may have a great explanation for why you're doing that. You may have a license, you may have some other reason, a rationale to do that.
Sure.
It makes perfectly good sense, and Greg comes back and says, "Okay, now I understand." On the other hand, there may be some other indicators here that we need to find out about a person who brings a gun into this situation. So, are there other things? Has your attitude changed? Are you feeling frustrated? Or are there some things out there that's made you angry? Or do you have a reason that doesn't make sense for you to bring a gun into a setting like this? So, I think we need to go further than just. I mean, if you've got that good explanation, nothing else has changed. I'm going to ask you to look into, make sure you have everything right with the security, the police, and everything's okay about that. But if there are other indicators, I'm going to be concerned.
Well, and on top of that, though,
right.
Let's just considering this example. You give me. We talk about it. You give me some sort of rational explanation, perhaps, but
there's layoffs.
Let's say
concerned for my safety.
Absolutely, but perhaps I'm somebody who's extremely uncomfortable around guns.
Okay.
Perhaps there's something in my background
Okay.
Related to somebody just having a gun in the room and something horribly happened that was unintended.
Sure.
Given something like that, then I might say, well, Jeff, I'm not sure I can work in an environment like this. I might say it to you, depending upon the context of our relationship, or I might go to a colleague and pull a trusted colleague aside and say, hey, let me tell you about something that I'm very uncomfortable about.
Would you do that? Would you do that? That's
Absolutely. In fact, this last year I got to know somebody who quite well, who I found out as I got to know this person, carried a handgun in her car. Mm-hmm. And this is somebody who's a mother and has a child. And in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, that's extremely unsafe.
Right, with
I
a
don't,
child. And
but then again, I'm somebody that has a certain value around gun ownership that perhaps is not congruent with others in the community, and I completely recognize that and respect it. Still, when I asked her about it, actually, she told me about it. And so when we had subsequent conversations about whether that makes sense and why would you have it and in what context would it actually be useful for you and that sort of thing, her explanations to me were rational, made complete sense. Right. But at the same time, I did say to her, well, if you ever want me to ride in your car, you're going to have to consider taking that handgun out because I'm just uncomfortable with it being in there with children in the car, and who knows what could happen that's unintended. And it was just a flat out statement, and no big deal. She understood where I was, and I understood where she was, and
Well, Greg, I think, if I may say this too, that the idea that you mentioned a couple things as you started to talk about that, a person's position on gun ownership and what it means to the individual may vary greatly. I may have a great fear of guns. I may have that event that's happened in my life and I just can't be around it. And there I'm alarmed and I'm going to report you about that. I'm going to go and talk to other people. Second thing you said was consultation. You were going to go talk to someone else about this. And I think that makes sense from so many different levels because it's, once again, you're not isolating yourself with that event. We talked about mental health just a moment ago that says, okay, there's self-regulation in this. I get feedback from others. I work in a social context, and so I may want to talk to others about this to get information and to see if I'm okay with it. You know, my opinion is just an outlier, as you mentioned, Jeff, and those things, and just, you know, where do we stand with that? So I think you have to, you know, kind of weigh this in the context that it's in, and then you have to actually gather more information about what, because if it's an unstable person who's having trouble with colleagues, who may be up for tenure, we'll come back full circle here a little bit, but maybe some other kind of things in their lives, they may jeopardize the safety of others, and it's about safety when you're talking about guns.
You know, it's funny though, when we talk about changes in behavior, do we really ever keep an eye on anyone else? Do we really look at them? Do we really see changes in behavior? Sure, if I bring a gun in, that's pretty drastic, but you know, my thought is we really don't look at anyone else.
Well, yeah, that's another good point. I think we do. It's what we do about it. You know, oftentimes there will be gossip, office gossip, or you know, people will talk. Hey, did you see this person do that? And this kind of situation, and people will share that information. But the next step is there something to be done about it? Is this something that we need to pay attention to and go to a next level where there's actually an action, a behavior that the person is confronted or something else done as a result of that? And I think for the most part we tend not to do these things.
No, you know, and can we agree that there are some mental health issues within the population where we're all working?
Yes.
Okay, and there's probably some people that are in a crisis.
Yep.
They may not all turn to violence, but am I responsible? You know, I asked that question earlier, and I'm going back.
I don't know if I'm not sure what you mean by am I responsible, but certainly I think if you have a relationship with somebody, and in that relationship you care about that person, you genuinely care about that person as a human, then if you start to see warning signs of some sort of mental illness crisis coming up, I think it's not so much of am I responsible, but because I care about you and I care about our relationship, I'm concerned for you, and therefore I'm going to want to bring it up. I'm going to want to talk with you about it, and then based on that conversation, perhaps seek somebody else's counsel to try to see that you're okay.
When you say that, I think we got to go back to Mike and say, well, what are those signs? You know, if you and I are having a discussion and you're saying, oh, gee, I think I'm concerned, Mike, what are we looking for?
Well, it does have to do with good mental health, and we outlined that just a little bit earlier in the show. But also, I think there's something called resilience. This ability really to rise to the task and deal with challenging situations in a way that there's a self-regulation in there that keeps you mentally healthy, and that you're actually connecting with others. And you know, it's really the ability to care for yourself. And as Greg was just saying, also sometimes we're caring for others, that we get concerned and do these things. And I think those are some of the things that we want to be aware of. The ability to control, the self-control issue. You know, this notion of managing stress and staying focused under pressure, and ability to really kind of move through a stressful situation. Use a problem-solving technique, for example, kind of looking at your options, weighing what the best option is, and then taking a course of action. You know, Greg said it's again to consult with other people about these kind of issues. The emotional awareness. Does a person know that they're under stress? Do they know that things are going wrong for them? Do they have a certain awareness about their own ability, emotional ability, from moment to moment? And how does that fit into the context with others? And certainly this emotional self-management. you know, in mental health, there's lots of examples of these kinds of things where people have to learn proximity. If you're in any relationship, a marriage relationship and other kinds of relationships, the ability to sometimes be very close and then sometimes distance back. And that regulation, that proximity regulation is very, very important. But it's also in the same way with emotional difficulties or emotional issues that come up for us. You know, how well can we manage those issues?
Well, you say that about me looking at myself, my self-awareness, but what about, for example, Greg looking for signs in someone else, or you know, me looking for signs in someone else? What are we looking for? And I take that back to the Amy Bishop case. What signs did we miss?
Wow, I think, well, in that particular case, as some of us, we've read in the news, in the media, that there was a long-standing a pattern in life of reacting poorly to stress, and of course we all know some of the details of that. And her, you know, she'd shot and killed her brother early on, and I mean that's a serious indicator there. But and then bomb threats and some other things that have come up or alleged in that way, and certainly I think. Those, now, you asking the question, what are the indicators? I think first of all that there's a change, a dramatic change of some sort in the behavior, in what you know about the person as you get to know them. Now, and let me caution about that, because I think, you know, an isolated behavior, if you see something that looks, you know, rather strange, and that's the only sample of behavior, it's going to be hard to know until you get a larger view of the person and sample a person's behavior over a period of time. But if you know someone and know of someone and know a little bit about them, I think you can make a prediction there. I certainly think there's an indicator that something may be wrong when there's a drastic change. There's a change emotionally, socially, there's some isolation, there's a pulling back and the withdrawing of things, there's depression, there's anxiety, and those are all those mental health issues that we have to be concerned about. And so, what we talk about in mental health, the psychosocial evaluation, a mental status evaluation. As a matter of fact, is this person oriented? And I would go further than talk about the notion that not only can this person respond to stress, but they can use humor. They can relate to you about, okay, this is tough, but I think I can get through it. Is the way they talk about the self-talk notion to themselves, but also the outward talk, where they're saying, this is a very tough situation, but I think we're going to make it through this. And so those kind of indicators where a person has awareness of it, you're noticing this drastic change, but their presentation allows you to say, okay, this person can work through these kinds of issues, and that's going to make me feel a little better about a person going through stress. If they're isolating themselves, if there's a change, if they're using alcohol or drugs more, if they're isolating themselves, if their anxiety level is going up, if they're withdrawing in depression and lack of concentration, and all of those kind of changes that we look at in mental illness, any kind of those signs, I think we need to respond.
So I guess to put it in kind of a nutshell, what you're saying is we have a typical pattern of behavior that you are comfortable with. You know me, you have an idea how I'm going to behave, but if something's happening outside of that normal pattern of behavior, that's an indicator.
I think so.
Okay.
There's a lot of things that in a context where you might want to change your behavior or learn a new skill or stop doing some things but I think given that you put that in context, so that there's some there's stressors out there's a conflict that a person's going through, or as back to this case, there's a career on the line, or there's a major question about whether things are going to work out well for a person, I think we have to pay attention to that.
You know what's funny, though, when you talk about her case, strange behavior seems to be fairly normal. When we look at the history of having shot her brother and stealing car and the alleged pipe bombs and, the incident in the restaurant, strange behavior seems to be the norm.
Well, we were talking earlier before the show about just the eccentric professor.
Yes.
The person who has just the different way of doing things.
Right.
They don't fit the norm. And I just want to say, I don't think there's anything too much wrong with that idea to have some egocentricity about yourself, and there's some differences. That makes you unique and special in the world as well. So, you know, that's not really enough of an indicator that there's a real problem. So there are people out there that do things very differently.
Well,
and more power to them.
Well, you know, you say that, and I'd like to get this around the idea of high intelligence and mental illness. And we just touched on that earlier. Is there a relationship there? Do we see more mental illness with people that are of higher intelligence?
Well, yeah, that's one of those questions that take a little bit of an answer there, because I think if it's just intelligence, you know, if you isolate intelligence out of this sort of a larger or holistic view of a person, the ability to interact with your environment, to predict what's going to happen, to engage in problem solving and situations and make good choices for yourself, and intellectual ability will get you a long way. Obviously, what we're talking about using this case example here today is that this person moved up to the ranks. They had a very powerful position, and was able to use that intellectual ability to be successful in their career to a certain extent. It was more than just the intelligence that was the problem here, though. That, you know, just so you use the intelligence, but you don't have that what some of the other writers, Goldman, I think, and some of the other guys that talked about social intelligence, the ability to not only be accurate from an intellectual point of view, but to be accurate on a social and emotional point of view, and that was what was missing with that.
Okay, that makes sense. I think we've come to the point where we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this. You're watching the Education Forum. Welcome back to the Education Forum. Today's topic is the impaired professional. What are the signs? My guest, Dr. Mike Baltimore, and of course my co-host Greg Blaylock, and I are having a discussion about this topic today. And I would like to go back to the issue of people that have high IQ, high intelligence, and are showing the signs of impaired mental health. And, you know,
well,
is this typical? I mean,
yeah, and I think that's a great question to ask. I think in my mind, I find there seems to be a overriding assumption that people who are extremely intelligent, who have extremely high IQs, also are a greater risk for mental illness, and that's an assumption. I'm not so sure, Mike. I'm sure you could talk a bit more about this. I'm not so sure that's been proven, or that assumption bears out, or maybe it bears out in specific circumstances.
Okay.
Certainly, when we look at kids and young adults who we categorize as gifted, that is, kids with kids and young adults with IQs above 130, we see that they're actually at less risk for mental illness in a general sense than kids below 130, and for many of the reasons that you went into a few minutes ago, Mike. And so I'm not so sure that there is a direct correlation between intelligence and mental illness.
Well, you say that, but one of my concerns is people with higher intelligence appear to have more awareness of the world, and being unable to turn that off, wouldn't that have, some impact on one's mental health?
Well, I'm really thinking that we mentioned a moment ago about social intelligence, the ability to sort of regulate your own emotions and deal with other people and read signs from others. I mean, this notion of feedback from other people, and some people, if you've ever been in a conversation where you feel like a person's talking at you as opposed to with you, and that give and take and accommodation, as they talk about in relationships and in communication, I think that's kind of an indicator. You may have a person who's very intellectual and can give the speeches, write the papers, but they're not able to, regulate and give back and forth and accommodate the people around them.
Okay.
And so, you may be very intelligent on one scale, but that may be a risk for mental illness or problems in living. On the other hand, a very low IQ before mental retardation, maybe say in the 80 range or something, where a person at that level may not be able to predict what's coming next, and therefore not seeing obstacles and make good decisions about what to do in the situation that they're in. So you run an extreme. So the question of whether or not it is strongly connected or strongly correlated with it, I think the answer, I'm sorry, is it depends on a lot of other factors, the life factors, the experience level, what was that person's life like, the lifestyle according to Adler, and some of the other kinds of things that happen in really kind of working those together. Now, I do think that the intellectual capacity really mediates some of the mental health issues that if you can think yourself out of a problem, perhaps that, and certainly there are some counseling theories out there, the cognitive behavioral theories, some of the others, that say that using your thoughts, focusing on that, changing your thoughts, and looking at how thoughts are connected to feelings and behaviors will allow a person to then make good choices. So the more intellectual capacity a person has, perhaps they can work themselves through some mental illness, some stress, some other kinds of problems.
Or intellectualize them away.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely...
It's like when you talk to Albert Ellis, and he talks about with certain mental health issues, you don't do the RET, you don't do the cognitive behavioral.
Well, there's actually some of those defense mechanisms that talk about, they're from the psychoanalytic, psychodynamic literature, that talk about these are ways to defend ourselves against anxiety in the world. And some of these the type of defense mechanisms are really symptomatic, because if I'm intellectualizing through my problems, I'm rationalizing my problems as okay when they're not, and I'm not actually really weighing information and getting to the truth, or as much as we can to the truth, and really objectively looking at this, that may be a sign the person has some real issues. And so the over-intellectualization, the use of language, there are lots of those indicators that for example, when you're in counseling and a client comes in and says and starts talking about their depression or their anxiety in a very intellectual way, we also know that they're avoiding perhaps the emotional side of things and the feelings that they may have about that, and that becomes a defense for them. And I think the same is true when we're high intellectual ability, that can mask certain problems in social interactions and emotional issues.
But one of the problems I see here is we're not all trained in mental health. We're not all trained to be counselors, and we're out there in the world, and it's a scary world.
We're trying to remedy that, by the way. I just want to say in the counseling program. But
one person at a time, we're going to convert you. But it concerns me because there's those people out there, and we're exposed to them, and it could be an issue.
Well, you know, I don't think you have to be a psychiatrist or psychologist, mental health professional to really see some of these signs. I mean, some of the issues we've been talking about today are common sense, straightforward. You see a change in a person that you don't normally see, and it concerns you. You know, some people will say this is a gut reaction.
Yes,
There's something wrong with this, and I'm not so sure that's not a bad way to go on certain things. If it feels wrong to you, maybe there's something that alerts you to do something about it.
Well, isn't that what we've always said about gut reaction? There's a reason you're getting that feeling. You've seen this pattern before, and it meant this. So when you have that gut feeling, that maybe you're seeing it again.
You know, I want to bring us back to something we talked about earlier, and it is connected to this, and that's the ability to see this in others, because people who have these serious mental illness issues that are masked by the intelligence may be hired, may come on and be your colleague in a situation, and it may be a setup for some serious issue down the road. And I'm wondering, back to your question, let me ask the question, if you will, too, here, to you guys. Is that okay? In the hiring practice, shouldn't we know more information about this person other than that, just that vita, that resume, and how well they do in the first interview? Shouldn't we know a little bit about family history and other kind of issues?
Can we ask those questions anymore?
Well, let's
I don't know.
It's a great question, but let's just assume that we can ask those questions for the sake of this conversation.
Okay.
And then my thoughts on that first come to the idea of, well, so you've got some stuff that's happened in your background. If people can dig into your family history, if people can dig into your history as a teenager, and find some things that might correlate with a higher risk to develop mental illness or whatever, let's say even a health issue, physical health issue, then we could start treading on getting around ideas of discrimination. And so suddenly I'm now questioning, I didn't get hired for this position. Is it because my father had a mental illness and I was required to report that to you or not? I was turned down for this health insurance.
Right,
is it because
right.
I come from a high-risk background? So just asking more questions could be actually as problematic or more problematic than
Right, and there's certainly both sides of that issue.
Yes.
What do we do? I think it gets back to Jeff's original question of, what do we do? How do we recognize these issues, and how much responsibility do we have in managing these kinds of things? I think our hands are tied in certain ways that we have to wait till there's an event, then we become reactive to a situation as opposed to proactive. Now, in counseling, we're always talking about prevention, and so if I see that change, Greg was talking about you, and you use the example bringing the handgun, bringing it in. But if I see that drastic change in the person, then maybe I'm obligated to talk with you about that, to bring it up, and if I don't get a satisfactory answer, there's still some concerns to begin to consult and to make that a little larger issue until something is, and in doing that, and it may not fit with what Greg was talking in my original question about can you really interview and ask those kind of questions that may be some mental health indicators coming in, and can you use, for example, just take off on that a second, can you use a personality inventory, the Rorschach, MMPI-2, some of those other tests for employees coming in? Now, some companies do that, by the way.
Yes.
And other government and public agencies may be prevented from doing some of that. But can you use that kind of information in making a decision about hiring? It may be discrimination and may lead to a lot of other things. Greg just pointed that out.
Could open a heck of a can.
But once you're in that situation as a colleague, then maybe there is something I can do on a personal level with that other colleague of mine that I'm really concerned about. And I may have to alert that person. I also have to alert other people around those issues. And it may be about safety. And maybe my concerns are not necessarily come to fruition. They may not. They're just that eccentric notion that we talked about a moment ago, and there's no harm in that. Maybe there is. I have certain responsibility to do something here.
Yeah. But I just wonder when you have catastrophic things happen, such as the Amy Bishop incident. It's really easy after the fact, and you talked about it, Mike, to be reactive and to look back and go, here were the warning signs. Why didn't we miss them for whatever reason?
Right. How did we
I
miss
wonder,
them? Yeah.
in reality, if we know, if we're trying to be proactive, and so your colleagues know what the warning signs are. Is it still even possible to look at somebody and say, I think there's something there? I mean, take your example. You're talking about bringing a gun to work. Well, with the Amy Bishop case, it's not like she had the gun and was just putting it on the table, and others should have picked up on it. It was from, allegedly, it was hidden away in a purse or something like that.
Yeah.
And she allegedly pulled it out at that point. And so even looking at her, I wonder, if they were being vigilant about that, would they have even picked up on anything? I seriously doubt it. And so in talking about becoming more vigilant for warning signs, are we not possibly creating a social hysteria where everybody is sort of looking at everybody else and trying to pick up on warning signs that where it may or may not even be useful?
Well, you say that, but what's the opposite? We're reactive. We wait till it occurs. We wait till there's a shooting. We wait till there's an incident, and then we get involved and say, "Geez, there were signs there. We should have done something." Or do we do something about it?
Well, it seems to me that we need to get to know each other on a certain level, and that if we're working in a group, and there's certain norms in group behavior. There's behaviors that are expected, and there are certain norms and levels of behavior. Now, I may be in a group, and I may be a person who likes to be isolated and not interact too much, and I may be okay in that group, and the group accepts that, and those kind of things happen. But there are expectations where people have to interact in a work setting, in an academic setting we've been talking about in other ways, and it should be fairly obvious. I don't think we have to go out on a witch hunt or anything to find each other in that sense. But if there's a concern about someone, shouldn't a person say something about that? I was in a group meeting just the other day, and there was one person that never spoke. They looked down at their paper. They were focused down. The other, very high level of interaction with others. The one person was looking down. I felt the need to kind of reach out to that person and say, "Hey, you okay? What do you think about this issue?" And just to check in with them. Sometimes this is just that easy. Just checking in with a person. Are you okay with this? Yeah, I'm just dealing with this, and that's fine. We move on with that. But I don't know how many close friends this Amy Bishop person we're talking about was there a person that can kind of and some of us who are married and have family relationships, we get that feedback on a regular basis, and so was there someone out there to kind of grab this person and say, "Hey, are you sure this is what you want to do, or what's going on with you?" As a check-in measure, and it keeps things in balance, and that stability and balance, because after all, I mean, we all have to deal with stress. It's just like, do we have some support networks? Do we have a person out there, or people? And we don't have to have a million friends on Facebook or some of those, but most of us have 3 or 4 close personal friends we can and allies we can call on and get feedback. And I think that, I don't know for sure, we have to look at that in her case, but it may have been missing that there was no one on that faculty who felt very close to that person. And on the other hand, she may have pushed other people away and not allowed for that. But I also think that's a good sign of mental health, that you've got some friends you can call on.
But you mentioned something I think that's important, and that's when you talk about a spouse or a close friend that can say, how you doing, or pull you back. And I think we had the opposite in the Amy Bishop case, because if you look at her husband seemed to be involved with these incidents.
Yeah, I'm certainly concerned about him after reading something of the things in the paper, and we don't know how far to go with that. But the notion that he may have been involved or allegedly involved in the pipe bomb issue, and then it did say in some of the media that he first denied there was a gun in the house, and then he said, "Oh yeah, we've been to the shooting range and there was a gun." So there's some inconsistencies in those kind of stories, and it makes me really wonder if this person was really giving her feedback and helping her with this, or really part of an instigation that kind of allowed her to continue in these
or an enabler.
Yes, enabler.
Kept her going in that direction. So,
absolutely.
Well, I think this is a good place to end the show. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into the Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. I'd like to thank my guests, Dr. Mike Baltimore.
Thank you,
and
Jeff.
of course, my co-host, Greg Blaylock. So tune in again for the Education Forum. The Education Forum is a production of the studio in the College of Education and Health Professions at Columbus State University, Columbus, Georgia. Executive producer, Tom Hackett. Director is Mike Baltimore. Produced by Jeff Conklin with help from Greg Blaylock. Camera and sound technician, Justin Bakuti.